Good afternoon. Can you all hear me well? Good? All right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Matt Gress, and I'm the Director of the Governor's Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting. Thanks for joining us today. Today's presentation will entail details on the fiscal year 2019 executive budget. So let's begin. We'll start with a general fund snapshot, both of the current fiscal year and in fiscal year 2019. Give you a sense of where we see the national and state economies going and that impact on the general fund revenue flow. And then we'll move on into the 2019 budget priorities of the governor. Chief among them is K-12 education, and we will wrap up with some highlights. So let's take a look at the general fund. For fiscal year 2018, we're projecting an ending balance of about $43 million. A structural balance of $5.6 million. Moving into 2019, the executive budget has projected revenues of $10.2 billion and a total spending plan of $10.1 billion, leaving us with an ending cash balance of about $67 million and an ending structural balance of $5 million. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Governor's Chief Economist, Glenn Farley.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Glenn Farley. I'm the Chief Economist for OSPB, and as Matt alluded to, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the construction of the Executive Revenue Forecast. Specifically, the first step every year in constructing that revenue forecast is figuring out where we think the national and state economies are going in the next couple of years. And the path to doing that is looking at some leading national and local indicators and teasing out what those effects might be, if any, on state economy and downstream state revenue. Those of you that have been paying attention to this presentation for the past couple of years are probably fairly familiar with a common refrain that you get from us, which is that we're cautiously optimistic and we're expecting slow but sustainable growth. And that's been the post-recession trend since about 2012, and to a certain extent that remains true in the current executive budget. Specifically, we believe that the revenue forecast is conservative, realistic, and achievable. Having said all of that, however, we're beginning to see some signs that for the first time since that recession, we may be on the cusp of a turnaround and a return to more traditional, robust levels of growth, both nationally and in this state. So what do I mean by that? Let's start by looking at some leading indicators at the national level. Specifically, one we've been watching recently has been surveys of consumer confidence and what's a de facto survey of investor and business confidence in the equity markets, equity market prices. Both of those indexes have surged to post-recession or all-time highs. What's also interesting is the timing of the surge. We're not talking 12 months, 18 months, or 24 months. Just in the past 6 months or less have we seen real acceleration in these leading indicators, which suggests something has recently changed and that something gives consumers and businesses greater confidence about the near future. We've identified two potential candidates that could be creating that increased optimism. The first is a loosening of regulatory burdens placed on businesses by the federal government, and the second is comprehensive tax reform and the passage of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Both of these things combine to give businesses and consumers real fiscal relief. They can turn around and use that fiscal relief to either spend more money on consumption goods or invest more money in the economy, both of which should be favorable for general fund revenues in the next couple of years. Looking more locally, Arizona's labor market is the strongest it's been since the recession. Specifically, the state unemployment rate is at a 10-year low, while state total employment is at all-time highs. The tightening of this labor market, coincident with this fiscal loosening at the national level, creates a unique opportunity for wage growth and other kinds of income growth at the state level. If we do see that wage and income growth materialize, it should in turn support higher general fund revenues over the next couple of years. And what I really want to stress is that Arizona is particularly well positioned to take advantage of a turnaround at the national level. Manufacturing is a base economic sector, and it's also been an area of focus for both state and federal policymakers. Arizona's manufacturing sector since 2015 has expanded by more than 5% in terms of total employment, compared to nationally an expansion of just 1.5%, and in our Mountain West peer states an expansion of just 4%, meaning if manufacturing turns out to be a better performing sector in the near future than other sectors, that should mean that Arizona will outperform other states in the near future as well. Also, according to new census data, in 2017, Arizona was the fifth fastest growing state in the nation. That growth is being fueled not so much by natural births, but rather by in-migration. That means people are voting with their feet. They're effectively saying, relative to where I am, I think I could do better in the near future in Arizona, so I'm going to go to Arizona. If they're right, that should support higher general fund revenues in the near future as well. Considering all these factors together, we believe we're well positioned to meet or exceed the executive general fund revenue forecast. And to talk more specifically about that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Bashar.
Thank you, Glenn. Good afternoon. My name is Bashar Naji. And in this slide, I will talk about our fiscal year 2018 general fund revenues. Our forecasted revenues are in orange, and our actuals are in blue. As you can see, for the first 5 months, we kind of broke even, meaning that actuals and forecasted revenues were very close. In December, we saw a substantial increase in actuals over forecast, a $76 million increase. The main reason for this increase is the individual income tax revenue. The next slide talks about the projected increase in general fund revenues as they compare to FY17 actuals. Actual revenues in December were 7% higher than projected, and year-to-date actuals and revenue are $86+ million higher than forecast. Therefore, we are confident that we will meet our growth projections that range from 3.2% in FY18 to 4.2% in FY21. And now I will turn this over to Christina, who is going to discuss some of the revenue-enhancing policies that we are proposing over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Bashar. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Dugnon. As Bashar explained, the executive baseline forecast calls for a 3.8% revenue growth in fiscal 2019. However, that number does not include the $55 million in executive initiatives, which provide additional funding for further investment in K-12 education. Beginning with expanding tax fraud prevention services. In fiscal 2016, we allowed the Department of Revenue to partner with a private firm to identify fraudulent individual income tax refund requests. Because of the success of this partnership, the executive budget includes an expansion of these services to include transaction privilege tax underreporting. The executive estimates this will bring in $30 million in additional revenue every year to the general fund. Moving on to an increase in audit and collections resources, giving the Department of Revenue a $2 million investment to address the growing collections inventory, we estimate the additional resources can generate a net benefit of $25 million a year to the general fund. This brings us to our $55 million total of revenue-enhancing policies for fiscal 2019. Another important thing to note is that our revenue forecast includes administrative improvements identified by the executive and by agencies. For example, the Lottery Commission will be adding 450 new vending machines and rolling out inline sales at 330 stores. Moving on to an executive priority of increasing military pension exemption. 52,000 veterans in Arizona receive a pension for their service. In 1989, the state partially exempted the first $2,500 of this income from being taxed. That amount has not changed or been adjusted for inflation in almost 30 years. Because of that, the value is actually less of half of what it was in 1989. For this reason, the executive budget more than doubles the exemption to $10,000 over 2 years and accounts for inflation every year thereafter. Before moving on to our fiscal 2019 executive priorities, I will go through some supplemental funding issues for fiscal 2018 that are included in the executive budget. Of the total amount of $3.6 million in supplemental funding for fiscal 2018, $10 million is going to the School Facilities Board for building renewal grants, and $4.1 million is going to the Forester to help offset some costs of an unusually high fire season. I will now turn it over to Charlie, who will discuss the key priority of the executive budget, K-12 education.
Thanks, Christina. I'm Charlie Martin. I cover K-12 education at OSPB. And Governor Ducey's primary focus since taking office has been maximizing the state's investment in K-12 education. In fiscal year 2018, total state funding for K-12 is $823 million higher than it was in fiscal year 2015. And over the last 3 years, $1.7 billion has been added to K-12 above fiscal year 2015 funding levels. This slide shows the growth in K-12 funding over that period. In fiscal year 2016, Prop 123 added over $300 million to state funding for schools. Last year, state funding for K-12 grew through targeted investments in teacher salaries, early literacy, results-based funding for high-performing schools, and new school construction. This year, the fiscal year 2019 executive budget continues the trend of increasing support for K-12 education by phasing in the restoration of a key portion of the state aid formula that's been suspended in part since fiscal year 2009. The fiscal year 2009 budget prioritizes education. Over 80% of new initiative spending is dedicated to K-12. That amounts to $190 million in new initiatives that are on top of baseline adjustments for enrollment growth and inflation. This slide details the individual initiatives that comprise that $190 million investment, but we'll discuss them in more detail in the coming slides. The largest single investment in the fiscal year 2019 budget increases per pupil funding through the basic state aid formula. More specifically, the executive budget restores a portion of the formula that's been suspended in part since fiscal year 2009, known as District Additional Assistance and Charter Additional Assistance. What this means is that in fiscal year 2019, schools will receive an additional $100 million in funding, and that new, permanent, and ongoing funding will grow by about $68 million per year until fiscal year 2023, when the suspensions of the formulas will be completely phased out. This represents new, ongoing funding for schools that may be used for things like capital and operations, including increasing teacher salaries. The budget also increases funding for joint technical education districts. Large joint technical education districts serving over 2,000 students have received less than 100% of the state aid funding since fiscal year 2009. This year, in fiscal year 2018, large JTEDs are receiving 95.5% of state formula funding. This will be increased to 100% of state aid funding in fiscal year 2019, and will add resources that benefit courses and industry-certified programs that benefit the majority of Arizona's JTED students. In addition, the fiscal year 2019 budget completes the teacher salary increase that began this year. This year, over 54,000 teachers are receiving a salary increase that was proposed by the executive and enacted in the fiscal year 2018 budget. The fiscal year 2019 budget adds $34 million to complete this 2% salary increase, and then takes the additional step of moving the full $68 million of ongoing funding into the base level of the state aid formula. What that means is that it'll be adjusted for inflation going forward, and that the benefit to teachers will be permanent. I'll hand it off now to Brett, who will discuss some of our new initiatives for school facilities.
Thanks, Charlie. My name is Brett Cloninger. As you can see from this slide, the executive budget includes an additional $35.2 million for building renewal at School Facilities Board. This includes items for major maintenance such as roofs and HVAC systems. With this $35.2 million, we're providing a total of $51.8 million for building renewal, which is the highest amount since fiscal 2007. We feel that this is being driven, this building renewal recommendation is being driven by increased demand. What we've seen is that the deficiency corrections program in the early 2000s and the late 90s provided about $1.3 billion for new building systems. Those building systems are now aging and coming due for replacement. In addition, the School Facilities Board has been very aggressive with meeting with school districts, and the school district's relationship with the School Facilities Board has improved to the point where they've been requesting more money. Additionally, one thing we should point out, additionally, the executive is recommending $88.1 million for 5 new schools or school expansions. We're proposing financing this through a 25-year COP with a $5.1 million annual debt service. You can see in the chart that our outstanding principal and debt service for issuances in the late 90s, but mostly in the mid-2000s, is starting to come off the books. So the red line is our debt service, the blue line is the principal. And so in this year's budget, we've got about $35 million of debt service dropping off the books, and so we're proposing replacing that with a portion of that with $5.1 million for the issuance of this $88 million. We'll still be seeing a drop of over $30 million in debt service in the fiscal 19 budget. Additionally, we're proposing $1.6 million for the schools for the deaf and the blind to double the number of home visits to support the families of young children with vision or hearing loss. This is the Birth to 3 program where we're providing an additional 21 staff members. Furthermore, we're providing $2.5 million for the Governor's Partnership for K-12 Computer Science Pilot Program. Furthermore, we're providing $4 million in the second year of expanding early literacy programs for schools with greater than 90% free or reduced price lunch. In higher education, the executive budget includes $8 million for capital and operational needs to assist in the cost of educating resident students. Next, we'll have Jacob.
Thanks, Brett. My name is Jacob Wingate. As you can see, currently Arizona is one of only 2 states that does not offer any sort of tuition assistance to National Guard members. This is concerning because the Department of Defense has shown us that education benefits are a strong driver in the recruitment of soldiers and airmen. The state of Arizona had a tuition reimbursement program until fiscal year 2010, when it was eliminated to help address the budget crisis. The executive budget includes $1 million to roll back this recession-era cut and restart that program. The program will function as a last dollar award, closing the gap between actual costs and any other tuition assistance received. The program is anticipated to assist at least 127 National Guard members pursuing a post-secondary certificate or degree. In addition, the executive budget leverages $6 million in state funds to draw $18.1 million in federal funds to build a new Readiness Center in Tucson. These federal funds have already been appropriated and are just awaiting the state match. This new investment, totaling $24.1 million, will enhance Arizona's security by improving training and mobilization readiness for the Arizona National Guard. It will also allow the 172 soldiers of the 222nd Transportation Company who are currently stationed in modular trailers to consolidate to a new facility. By providing this funding in fiscal year 2019, the executive budget will take advantage of the federal funding, which is set to expire in calendar year 2018. Next up is Fletcher to discuss the opioid crisis.
Thanks, Jacob. My name is Fletcher Monzingo. In his State of the State address Monday, Governor Ducey highlighted one of the most pressing public health issues today, and that is the opioid crisis. As you can see from this graph, opioid deaths have been up 74% from fiscal year 2012 to fiscal year 2016. So in response to this increase in the rise of deaths, as well as the lack of real-time data, Governor Ducey declared a public health emergency in June of 2017 to combat this epidemic. In that emergency declaration, he directed the Department of Health Services to develop a comprehensive set of recommendations to further help address the opioid crisis. So in September of 2017, the Department of Health Services, after extensive engagement with stakeholders, released its Opioid Action Plan. The Opioid Action Plan contains numerous recommendations from medical service providers to law enforcement, but there are 3 recommendations highlighted here, and that is increasing access to medication-assisted treatment, increasing access to naloxone, and increasing collaboration with our federal partners. While the first 2 are being addressed through a combination of existing state resources and new federal resources, the executive budget adds resources for the 3rd item, which is increasing collaboration with our federal partners. So the executive budget has $758,000 for the Department of Public Safety that will establish a new pharmaceutical diversion task force. This task force will work with other federal and local partners to combat both the abuse of prescription opioids and also the trafficking of prescription opioids. And this task force is in addition to other changes that will be discussed in the near term to address the opioid epidemic. And now I'll turn it over to Sarah to discuss child safety.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Pirzada. Looking at this chart, you can see that in March in 2015, the Department of Child Safety faced a backlog of more than 16,000 inactive cases and 33,000 open reports requiring investigation. Fast forward about 3 years, and the number of inactive cases and open reports has decreased far below the legislative benchmarks of 1,000 active cases and 8,000 open reports. Today, there are only 326 inactive cases and 6,173 open reports. Not shown here is the complete reversal of the out-of-home population trend. Between 2005 and 2016, the number of children in state care nearly doubled. In March of 2016, that trend reversed, and the population has continued to decline since then. Today, there are just over 15,000 children in state care. This transformation can be attributed to the commitment of DCS specialists, staff, and community partners who are working to improve child placement practices, improving in-home services, and getting children out of group homes and emergency shelters through family finding and permanency efforts. A welcome result of reducing the out-of-home population is an increase in the adoption rate for children in state care. In fiscal year 2017, 4,225 adoptions were processed, more than ever before. As you can see on this chart, when the out-of-home population began to go down, the adoption population growth rate also increased. For the state, adoption is a long-term financial commitment, as DCS pays an adoption subsidy to adoptive parents until the child reaches age 18 or graduates from high school. The executive budget includes $15.8 million to fully fund the adoption subsidy for over 33,000 children. DCS continues to develop and implement a secure and sustainable IT infrastructure necessary to carry on its mission. The department successfully deployed the mobile solutions in 2017. The mobile solutions provides case workers with a tablet they can use to enter case notes, create appointments, review and respond to reports, take pictures, and other vital tasks while completing investigations or visits in the field. The picture displayed here is a point in time which shows the mobile solution being used across the state. The executive budget includes funding to continue the development of Guardian, the new child IT management system. I'll now turn the time over to my colleague, Justin.
Hello, my name is Justin Romney, and I'll be walking us through the budget for the Department of Economic Security. The first issue I'll be discussing is resolving the Division of Developmental Disability structural shortfall. This is another example of a Great Recession-era fiscal policy that the executive budget corrects. During the Great Recession, DES was directed to use surplus revenues from prior year that otherwise would have reverted to the general fund to cover costs that the federal government would not. The fiscal year 2018 enacted budget prohibits this practice beginning fiscal year 2019, which will require these costs to shift to the general fund. This shift will ensure that spending plans go through the budgeting process, providing greater opportunities to vet costs and look for efficiencies. As a result, the fiscal year 2019 budget includes $10.7 million for these non-federally eligible costs. This funding will ensure that children ages 0 to 3 continue to receive free developmental evaluations. Eligible DD clients continue to have room and board, and all DD clients continue to receive case management services. Aligned with the governor's focus on Arizona's spirit of service, the executive budget fully funds adult protective services caseload growth using newly identified federal funding. In addition, the executive budget provides over $400,000 to allow Arizona's growing senior population to safely remain in their homes as they age by providing essential services. Finally, the budget provides a one-time investment of $1 million to expand the capacity of food banks all across the state to deliver fresh produce to Arizona families in need, particularly those in rural areas. I'll now turn the time over to my colleague Caitlin, who will discuss natural resources.
Thank you, Justin. My name is Caitlin Harrier, and I'll be walking us through the natural resource section. Arizona's 35 state parks continue to play an increasingly significant role in tourism and in the rural economies of our state. FY 2017 saw record-breaking revenue and visitation at our state parks. In fact, in September, they were awarded the gold medal for being the best managed state park system in the nation. So to continue upon this upward trajectory and add momentum, the executive seeks to add new investments to the system through revenue-generating opportunities, looking at state parks where we can really see that impact. One of those opportunities is at Oracle State Park, located about an hour north of Tucson, nestled into the Catalina Mountains. This is currently a day-use only park. So the executive proposes adding $4 million in investment to this park to turn it into an overnight camping destination. So the plan here would be to add camping via tents and RV sites, as well as cabins, to restore some of the historic cabins that are situated on the property, and also to further expand upon the hiking and biking trails that are already being used and enjoyed at this park. Moving now to Arizona's west coast, situated along the Colorado River in Parker, Arizona, is the very popular Buckskin Mountain State Park. This park was built over 50 years ago, so it is definitely due for an upgrade, and the redevelopment will add more capacity to meet the growing demand at this park, which welcomed over 100,000 visitors in fiscal year 17. The executive budget takes a phased-in approach to this redevelopment in order to minimize the impact to those who visit the park. It is busy year-round with people coming to enjoy recreation on the water from March to October, and then the rest of the year it welcomes a lot of snowbirds. So again, it would be a phased-in approach, with fiscal year 19 being the first out of 3 phases, and with $2.5 million allocated for that. I will now turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Vergara. The public safety section of the executive budget focuses on 2 priorities: increasing public safety in all parts of Arizona and providing real second chance opportunities to those who have paid their debts to society. The Department of Corrections has set an aggressive goal of decreasing recidivism rates by 25% over the next 10 years. To assist the department in achieving this goal, the executive has provided funding for multiple initiatives that seek to reduce recidivism rates and ensure that all Arizonans have a fair second chance. $1.7 million for additional substance abuse treatment, $1.4 million to expand inmate education programming, $400,000 to expand second chance employment centers. In total, these initiatives equate to a $3.6 million investment into treatment, education, and vocational training for inmates as they transition back into society. In June of 2017, Governor Ducey instructed the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Transportation, and the Governor's Office of Highway Safety to immediately begin efforts to mitigate and prevent wrong-way driving. To date, the executive has implemented a state-of-the-art infrared camera system to better detect instances of wrong-way driving and improve notification of law enforcement. Over 145 of these cameras have been installed, in addition to new illuminated wrong-way driving signs and increased patrolling of safety corridors. While these crucial first steps will help alert drivers, the executive has identified a need for a greater state trooper presence during the DPS night watch of the metropolitan Phoenix area in order to more quickly respond to wrong-way and impaired drivers. The executive budget provides $1.4 million to increase patrol coverage and response times for the night watch, which will reduce fatalities and save lives. Focused on securing the border, Governor Ducey established the Border Strike Force in 2015. This special task force conducts border security operations, seizing thousands of pounds of drugs and arresting over 2,000 traffickers and criminals since its inception. The Southern Highway Patrol Bureau of DPS has been critical to the success of the strike force. The executive budget looks to build upon these early successes by providing $2.9 million to increase 24/7 coverage of the Southern Highway Patrol Bureau. Given the state's proximity to the border, our freeway system is often utilized by criminals to traffic drugs and commit crimes. This investment represents year one of a 2-year phased-in approach that will allow DPS to achieve complete 24/7 coverage of the southern portion of Arizona, decreasing criminals' abilities to utilize our highway system for drug trafficking. Now my colleague Ben will speak to the executive budget's impact on our state highway system.
Thanks so much, Ryan. My name is Ben Blink. The Arizona Department of Transportation is responsible for overseeing more than 21,500 highway lane miles that it both maintains and rebuilds. The executive budget includes $25.6 million new dollars for restorative maintenance for Arizona's highways. This will increase the total budget for these surface treatments to almost $41 million, and that's the most that Arizona has ever spent on these treatments in state history. The funding will result in smoother, resurfaced roads for more than 3,000 additional lane miles in fiscal year 19 compared to the year before. That means better roads for driving, but it's also great for the budget. Investing in maintenance today means we replace our roads less often in the future, and replacing roads is expensive. For every $1 we spend on maintenance, we expect $6 in savings from future construction costs. So on the graph here, the orange bars represent our current maintenance spending, and the blue bars represent our deferred construction costs. So by increasing our maintenance budget from $15 million to $41 million, we expect our future road construction costs to decrease by more than $150 million. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ashley.
Thank you, Ben. The executive budget includes $10 million from the general fund, combined with approximately $20 million from other funds, to support a 1-year agency premium increase to be paid into the Health Insurance Trust Fund. The Health Insurance Trust Fund supports the state of Arizona's self-insured medical, dental, and pharmacy insurance plans. In 2016, there was an unpredicted and unusual spike in claims. Claims growth has since declined close to forecasted levels. However, as a result of the spike in 2016, the fund is still operating at a structural deficit. To bring revenues closer to expenditures in fiscal year 2019, the executive budget enacts this 1-year agency premium increase. Meanwhile, ADOA is working with a private party to evaluate the plan and identify ongoing changes that would turn this structural deficit into a structural surplus. The executive budget would not have been possible without the cooperation and ingenuity shown by all state agencies this fall. Agencies came to the table with $79 million in ongoing efficiency savings, which the executive budget redirects to fund education initiatives. Agency efficiencies supply 40% of the fiscal year 2019 education initiatives in this budget. The level of commitment shown by agencies to assist in the governor's priorities is very much appreciated. This slide shows a summary of the new investments in fiscal year 2019. You can see that 80% of the new spending is in education, and areas like economic security, public safety, and higher education make up the remainder. I'll now turn it back over to our director, Matt Gress, to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Ashley. So ultimately, you can see that this is a budget focused on K-12 education more than ever before. $400 million, Governor Ducey announced on Tuesday, going into our school system. $116 million in student growth and inflation. $100 million in additional assistance as the first-year payment of a 5-year rollback of recession-era cuts. $88.1 million for new school construction. A $35.2 million increase for building renewal grants for $51.8 million, the most we've spent since 2007. A $34 million second-year phase-in of the permanent increase to teacher salaries. $14.1 million in other targeted investments that we detailed earlier in the presentation. And finally, a $2 million rollback of large JTED recession-era cuts. So the commitment to K-12 is clear and is demonstrated in the fiscal year 2019 budget. I want to thank all of my staff for making this possible, making the impossible possible, and ensuring that the governor has a plan to move Arizona forward. So with that, I'll take a few questions. And for those of you who are watching online, you can access the governor's budget at azgovernor.gov or our agency website at azospb.gov. So, question time. Yes, sir.
How soon will they see the raise in teacher salaries?
So the raise in teacher salaries has already gone into effect for the first half of this year, and the second $34 million raise will go into effect in fiscal year 2019. Yes, Dana.
Can you describe a little bit more of the efficiency savings from the other agencies? I'm old and I couldn't see what there.
So we're proposing $79 million in efficiency savings. A few notable examples include capping private prison growth. We are seeing the lowest population in our prisons since the 70s. And so for the vacant beds that are available in our state facilities, that's where our inmates will go. But we're also seeing a decline in the prison population because of the governor's recidivism efforts. And so that is one example. Another example comes from agencies moving from privately owned space to our state-owned space, which is less costly, and we can do more by adding more agencies into those locations, and there are a number of moves in the budget. So those are a few examples, procurement savings, et cetera. Yes?
When the Department of Child Safety was formed, kind of the understanding was when there was a decrease in the number of children in out-of-home care, more money would be diverted into prevention. Can you talk about whether or not money has been increased for prevention in the Department of Child Safety?
It's my understanding that that we are maintaining prevention level services and also relying on federal resources to continue that work. Some of the out-of-home savings that we've seen, we're moving it into the adoption care subsidy program. But there still is a very clear commitment to the in-home preventative services, and that's one of the key drivers lowering the out-of-home population growth anyway, because they're preventing kids from entering state care in the first place by providing those important wraparound services. All right, well, we'll be here after the briefing to answer any more of your questions. Thank you for attending. Matt, M-A-T-T. Gress, G-R-E-S-S. Yeah.
I heard more sound-mindable stuff. You said things succinctly, but you also, they were succinct, but they were all encompassing too, as far as the content was concerned. So.
Happy to be quotable.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Matt.
I'm Priscilla.
Okay.
Just a quick question, is that okay?
Sure.
Some time?
Yeah.
All right, so first of all, name and title.
Matt Gress, Director of the Governor's Budget Office.
All right, so you mentioned at the very end that
governor is committed since coming into office to fully funding education above and beyond inflation every year. His budgets have reflected that, and so his executive budget for 2019 is no difference. He's visited schools all around the state, and he's heard that more resources are needed, including teacher pay, and what we're calling additional assistance. These are capital dollars that schools have not received since the recession. They're permanent and they're flexible. No strings are attached to this additional assistance money.